All right, let's start her up. Oh. Okay, we are on live with world famous skeptic, Suris the skeptic, he calls himself, and this is his first appearance on Craig Reed's channel. And as a matter of fact, he is the first atheist to ever appear on the channel. Tried to have the Godless Cranium on Wednesday, but we had technical difficulties. Lucky for the Godless Cranium. So, Suris, how you doing? Can you hear me?
I can hear most of the words you're saying. Most of it I'm having to interpret. It is a little bit laggy.
Can you hear me?
Yes, there's a decent bit of lag. I'd have to ask the question. My question would be: are you hardwired into your connection? That might be where half of your problems are lying.
To my phone.
Oh, that sounds much easier.
Much better, right?
Oh yeah, infinitely so.
Yeah, I figured. Okay, so we're good to go. Now, I thought you were going to blow me off. I thought you were just going to stay on Steve's until like whatever 9:20 or so.
No, I hopped on Steve's channel and told him explicitly I'd only be there for a certain amount of time because I already had things planned with you as well.
Okay, cool, good man. I just assumed you were going to stay on there until it ended, and then when it was over, come and say, okay.
Oh no,
now
no. Rum and Coke
That's
night
why I
goes
didn't have
on
everything
far too long.
Yeah, what was being talked about when I tuned in? It sounded like guns.
So the thing with Rum and Coke night is the idea is that, and granted, I don't drink alcohol, but I'll still participate because the conversations are fun. But the idea of Rum and Coke night is that the conversations will go in whatever tangential directions they will. And then people just drink and the conversations progressively go as far as they do. And the only exception is that if a flat earther can be gotten a hold of and brought into the chat, then the conversation will change to flat earth because that's hilarious as hell. But past that, it's all tangential conversation. So when they were talking about guns,
so it's just...
Yeah, it's just a bunch
whatever
of...
comes up.
Yeah, it's just a bunch of atheists, theists, and everybody... Yeah, you might want to mute the microphone on your PC so that I can only hear you through your phone.
Whatever comes up. Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, it is pretty much everything that can come up is what comes up. Because I mean, the conversation went from LARPing to guns to 3D printing weapons to different types of philosophy to the CCP to G-Man to like literally just everywhere.
G-Man. How did G-Man come up?
Well, the conversation started out with the CCP, which he's kind of part of by fiat, and that the conversation ended up dealing with G-Man as a result of that.
I got you. Okay, let me see if I can mute this because I think I thought if I just moved away. Let me see if I can mute this.
Yeah, the best thing you'd be able to do is head over to your computer's Google Hangouts real quick and just click the mute microphone button. And then that should stop that from being a problem.
Yeah, where is it on here? It's up on top somewhere.
Yeah, it should be on top. If you move your mouse up top, there'll be 5 buttons.
Yeah, where is it on? It's up on top somewhere.
Yep, you hit mute microphone, and then you can hit turn camera off as well, because that will actually drastically decrease the lag happening in the stream too. Because there's less data that has to be sent out when you turn the camera off.
Okay. Good deal.
So there we go.
So there we go. That should be perfect from now on, right?
Yes. Yeah, I much prefer being able to hear you when you speak as opposed to 10 seconds after you speak.
Yeah, it usually makes conversations a little easier. But with the first time when I had this on my laptop, Stephanie and I were having it was like a test run, and it was literally like 5 minutes after I would hear like I would say something. It was really weird. It was like being in a distorted echo chamber. So I would go like, "Serious, it's good to have you on the show," and you would say, "Well, it's good to be here," and then like literally like 3 minutes later, I'd hear, "It's good to be here." It's like
Yeah,
really freaky.
it's really weird and really laggy and really uncomfortable. But thankfully, I'm used to dealing with that because I do play a lot of online games. So there's certain things you listen for, like, did the last thing they say pertain to anything that was in this conversation? Okay, no. Do I know they're not crazy? Yes. Okay, they're probably lying.
Well, you're taking that as an article of faith. You don't know for a fact that I'm not crazy.
No,
You've
but
assumed that through meeting with me enough times that I've done nothing very disturbing, or at least outwardly disturbing.
You've done nothing to make me believe that you are crazy, and even if I did believe that you were crazy, I wouldn't treat you any differently because I don't see any pragmatism behind doing so.
Right. I got you.
Because even people who I think are, just crazy by fiat, like the minute I meet them, I'm like, oh, you're a flat earther. You're probably have a screw loose somewhere. I'll still engage with them as if I would anybody else because I think that until they've done something to make me upset, I still owe them that.
Right. Totally. I totally agree. It's like if they've done nothing to you personally, it doesn't really make any difference. Even if they're like a KKK person, I would still take them at how they act towards me. Even an atheist, serious. Even an atheist. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
I would even deal with an atheist on a personal level, like how they treat me personally. I know for a fact that you kill children and eat them, and I think that's wrong.
Okay,
but as you talk to me,
you need to understand. With hot sauce, they are freaking delicious.
I could empathize. I mean,
it tastes like veal.
Veal, huh? Do you only eat Christian children, or do you eat other atheist children too?
It's explicitly vegan children.
Vegan. Well, that's unique to you, right? Most atheists will eat only Christian children.
See, I've heard atheists that will eat, Christian children, Muslim children. I mean, bear in mind for the YouTube powers that be, this is all being spoken of in jest.
Oh yeah, exactly. We don't. He doesn't actually eat very many children.
Not very many.
This is all just jest. Don't demonetize me with. I don't even think anybody's watching right now. I didn't tell anybody that I was doing this, so I'll show it to them after the fact. But don't demonetize me.
I can also do a quick signal boost for you.
Yeah, if you want to send out a thing that says I'm talking with Craig, go for it.
Yeah.
I still don't know. This is my first broadcast, so I don't even really know how to prepare and advertise. I was a little bit afraid of putting out a thing because I sent out an ad for the Godless Cranium show and then I couldn't get it running. So I had a couple people in the live chat and I felt really stupid. So I figured it was smarter to just see if I could do it first.
The best thing to do is if you don't have a lot of good equipment and you're having to broadcast just through the Hangouts, which you are doing, figure out what setup you have to use beforehand. So now you know that you have to attach your phone in and then mute your main. Get that set up early, but in doing so, you can set a schedule on your. You can schedule the next event. Once you've had the event scheduled, it'll have a link to the actual YouTube video itself. Just advertise the link of that event, and it'll anytime somebody clicks it, if the video hasn't gone up, it'll take them to a blank one they can wait in, or if the video's up, it'll automatically redirect them to the live video. So I would just suggest just advertise through Twitter and link anybody that you specifically want to watch, because that's pretty much what I do, or that's what I used to do until I started working with equipment that could actually handle doing other things on stream besides just clicking the Google Hangouts button.
So what did you bought new stuff recently? Is that because of?
Well, by equipment meaning anything that I'm utilizing. So for me, the equipment in question would be software. I got OBS Studios and Streamlabs. And so when I had R and Raw in my video, the production quality on a live stream video was much higher than that of just a standard Google Hangout video.
How much was Streamlabs?
They're both free. They're both completely free.
Oh, they are?
Yeah, 100% free.
Oh.
All you have to do is you get OBS and then you run Streamlabs. Streamlabs piggybacks off of OBS. It grabs all your settings from OBS and then allows you to live stream through Streamlabs. And Streamlabs gives you added functionality. Like if somebody subscribes to the channel, it'll give you little notifications. If somebody donates anything through the Streamlabs or the Super Chats, it'll give you notifications for that. And then there's more things you can
donate.
add.
That's a great idea. Somebody donate.
Oh, believe me.
Anybody want to donate? Go for it. Do you get donations? Do you do super chats when you live stream? Do you have that set up yet?
I have not done a live stream since super chats were enabled on my channel.
Okay.
So not yet. The only live streams I've done recently have been on my gaming channel. And that one is so far away from being monetized that's not even a blip on my radar.
Right. It's like this channel. This channel is really far away from being monetized. What do you have to have, like 1,000 hours or something nowadays?
4,000 watch hours and 1,000 subscribers.
Yeah, I think I have 30 subscribers, so I'm not even close. I'm not even close.
It took me about 3 months to get to the point where YouTube would review my channel for monetization, and then another month and a half after that before they would actually monetize my channel. So
3 months from when you started your channel? You mean you're a new YouTuber? That was always my excuse.
I've only been around for 8 months.
Oh my God! Wow, serious? You're growing faster than I am. You're dwarfing me. You're making me embarrassed.
Well, there are YouTubers that are going faster than I am too.
Are there really? Who's growing fastest on your squad?
So Mr. Atheist, granted, he had the benefit of having Matt Dillahunty and a lot of other larger names on his channel to just kind of magnet people in, which I didn't have.
Yeah.
I've done most of mine through collaborations, and a few shout outs. But his trajectory was faster than mine, but now he's kind of evened out to where our trajectory is roughly the same. And we're both sitting like right under 3,000 subscribers. And we've both been around like 6 to 8 months.
Wow, that's pretty good. That's actually really good. But there's a whole atheist, there's a whole atheist grassroots infrastructure, which I'm starting to be way more aware of than I used to be. And this is one of the things I brought up in some of my, some of the videos I've made. There's a pretty much a grassroots movement of YouTube atheists is the most obvious example. But, it's kind of started with the Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens because they became relatively mainstream in terms of, they're not household names, but you can turn on Late Night with Jimmy Fallon, for example, or some normal show, and you'll
hear them name dropped decently and often enough.
Right. Because this is one of, tell me if you agree with this. My mother grew up religious. When she was younger, she was devoutly Roman Catholic, wanted to be a nun. And then when she went to college, her trajectory wasn't that dissimilar from, not necessarily you, but some of the atheists I've heard. She goes to college and she's all filled up with, a really rigid form of Catholicism and still thinks she's going to be a nun. And then her mind just starts being blown by some of the things she learns at college. She meets secular people who were supposed to be evil and aren't. She meets Muslims and they're supposed to be evil and they aren't. Right. So she starts questioning her faith. Now, she never questioned her faith to the point where she became an atheist. But I think that's because there was no such thing as, we're talking like mid-60s. She's a housewife. She turns on Late Night with Johnny Carson. You're not going to see atheists.
At that point, you had almost a 92% permeation of just varying denominations of Christianity in the nation. Now that number's down to 83.7. But that's almost a 10% difference. That's several thousand people.
Right. But that's also, there was no such thing. Like if you were somebody who was questioning your faith, like what you were doing when you were, 20, I guess? How old are you?
I'm 20. I'm 20. I'm 26 now.
26.
Questioning. It was easy for me to pop out of young Earth creationism. That happened just because I had a Catholic teacher who.
Right, because you got a little education.
Yeah, I had a Catholic teacher who understood biology, so I had a teacher who, to me, was not an evil, secular, atheist teacher. To me, all Christians were Christian. Period. That was the end of the story. So not only was it a source I trusted to begin with, but he was able to square modern biology with the Bible, and I was like, okay, if you can square it, then obviously I can square it somehow. So I just need to figure out how I can square those two. So it was easy for me to get out of young Earth creationism, getting out of Christianity in general. That was a couple years worth of questioning, and it wasn't even like Christopher Hitchens and Dawkins or anything like that did it for me, though. For me, that happened. I started absorbing their material after the fact. Like they had
Right.
almost no. I want to say that Hitchens and Dawkins, I didn't even know who they were except by like, if I heard the name, maybe it would ring a bell, possibly. Like maybe until after a year after I was already an atheist.
Right, but you had what I was trying to get at is you. I think I even heard this in you did a video on this, if I remember correctly. You
Yes.
clicked on people like Godless Cranium or somebody on YouTube, and you started watching videos. There was popular atheism for you to latch onto when you were questioning, correct?
Well, after
Like
after I'd already questioned. Once I had gotten to the point where I was like, okay, well, I'm probably not a Christian, and I'm probably not following the Judeo-Christian God in general, and I was still sitting in like kind of an agnostic area. That's when I was starting, like I was past the questioning phase, but I wouldn't have called myself an atheist yet. And then yes,
that's when you started.
Yeah,
okay,
that was around the time I started watching them.
Okay, so that's exactly the point I was making. If you were my mother, and it were 1967, and you were to the point where you're like, I'm an agnostic, there's nothing in the popular culture for you to latch onto.
Yeah, you would have ended up having a bounce back, where you just would end up
correct.
I know a lot of people who I know a lot of people who are older generation than me, and what they experienced is like they had that period like 2 or 3 years of doubting, and then they bounced back into their faith.
Right, because there was no outside thing to latch onto where you go, hey, that makes a lot. Because she would have resonated. She might not have resonated with. She would not have eaten children. She wouldn't go that far. But she would have. She would have liked some of the anti-clerical aspects of atheism, and the politically liberal. Forget it. She would have been all over it. That was a big part of why she started rejecting the church in general, because it was too. She became. She became Mrs. Feminist in the late '60s. She became like.
That was during second wave, wasn't it? Second wave feminism.
Kind of. Well, who are you talking about when you say second wave?
I'm trying to. It's more timeline wise. Hold on. Let me see.
I'm not really sure who's who. Like she was like Gloria Steinem, Ms. Magazine.
Yeah, second wave feminism is a period of feminist activity that began in the early 1960s and lasted roughly 2 decades. Yeah, like the waves of feminism they aren't tied to people so much as they are tied to periods of time.
Right. That's her for sure. It was the 60s, man.
The time sounded
Everybody
very
was
familiar.
doing it. Everybody was doing it serious. It was the 60s. Some people were doing cool, fun stuff, and my mom did feminism.
Yeah. I mean, so I have a lot of friends who kind of feel that way with me, because my big thing is that I like having conversations that are deep and meaningful, and sometimes frustrating because there's always people who just disagree with me. That's fine. Like me and you disagree on a lot, and we've never had a conversation where we've come to arms over it.
Right.
But there are some people that are like, man, that's just such a waste of time, and they'd rather go out and drink and party. And that's cool. That's what you guys do for entertainment. But it's not. I don't even consume a freaking drop of alcohol. That's not my shtick. That's yours.
Right. Totally.
Yeah,
so now, okay, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You're fine.
No, I was gonna switch gears. So if you have something else to say on it, go for it.
Nah, go ahead and switch gears. You're fine.
Okay. Well, but I was totally fine with the gear we were on. I was Now, did you have a comedy channel? Do I have that right in my mind, or am I making that up in my mind? Do you have some sort of comedy thing that you tried on the side?
So I remember that me and you had a conversation about this before. Right. The answer to that is I have never officially tried any type of comedy. It is something that I've been interested in, but it is not something that I have ever actively pursued outside of the little
Making
bits
jokes.
Outside of the little bit of comedy that I try to inject in my channel in order to make it to where maybe some of the heavier topics aren't quite so heavy.
Right. You're like the other day you had the Muslim thing, and you're like, You know, okay, let's have some fun. We don't.
Did it?
I'm not
Was
sure.
it the Muslim one? I did the last video I did was on intelligent design. And
There
then
was the week before you did something about the Muslim in hell for a Muslim. Is that right?
oh yeah, yes, the guy who took a bunch of screenshots from video games and like doctored them up to look like hell and used it for apologetics and
Right, but he started off with something very strange that he said, and then you said, "Well, I guess we could take issue with that, but you know, let's just have some fun," because it was I don't remember exactly what he said, but he
I
started
remember
off
it
with
was
something really weird.
very early in the video where I was like, I could nitpick here, but I have a feeling you're going to have a whole lot more that's going to be a lot more worthwhile to unpack than that.
Right.
So we're just going to carry on, and then it ended up being that he had a picture of freaking Bolivar 4 Dragon from Wrath of the Lich King in World of Warcraft, and at that point I was just like, there's 2 minutes left in this video, but I think I've already hit the best point of this video. I think
I've
that's
hit the jackpot with kooky views.
Yeah, I think I'm good here.
You're a gamer too?
Oh yeah, like most of my time, if I'm not spending it on my channel or at my job, it is gaming. Both me and Pam are very heavy gamers.
Really? Which ones? Warcraft? Is that one of them?
Warcraft is one of them. We play on a vanilla private server because we've both played the retail version of the game, and it's really oversimplified now, and we're not huge fans of it. But we're still fans of the story, so we follow the story that's happening with it because we like good stories. I'm also a fan of like old school Sonic the Hedgehog games. The Resident Evil series is great.
Those movies are based on games. Those
movies are based on video games.
Aha!
The video games
know that.
Video games have a much, I want to say, cheesier story, but also a better story because instead of focusing on Alice isn't even a character in the video games, and they focus on the other characters and give them development. And I enjoy the characters that are in those games, but a part of it's also nostalgia because it's a series I grew up with. So for me, even if some of those characters are a little thin, they're also characters that I grew up with. So maybe there's some.
So you were playing these games when you were a Christian?
Oh yeah.
Weren't they the devil's games? Weren't your family up in arms?
So
that you were playing the devil's games?
They
just didn't know. They had no idea. They
knew. They knew.
Oh,
so
okay.
here's the story behind that. There's a few layers to this story. So the first thing is when I was in first grade, I received a letter in the mail from my school stating that if my parents allowed me to watch Pokemon or play it, then I would be burning in hell. But my mom actually watched a little bit of Pokemon, not that she enjoyed it, but insofar as to determine if it was good for me to watch, and figured out that that letter was kind of full of horseshit. Same thing with something like Harry Potter. She was like, yeah, technically magic is bad as per the Bible, but at the same time, it's fiction, and if he's not actually trying to go around and cast spells, then what's the actual problem? With Resident Evil was a little bit different, and I'm really upset at that franchise because the name for that franchise in Japan is Biohazard. But in America, the copyrights to Biohazard were already owned by a different company, and they couldn't buy them. So they had to think of a different name. And the first game took place in a mansion, and every other game named Resident Evil stops making sense. But the first game takes place in a mansion, so they were like, okay, Resident Evil, that'll work. Sure, it'll work for one game, and we'll be fine. Like I said, the later games don't take place in houses anymore, so the name stops making sense after a while. But because of that, a game that in its original name, my mom would have been like, it's rated M for mature, but at the same my mom would have been like, it's rated M for mature, but at the same time, I mean, it's zombies. It's not like he's killing real people. It would be no problem. But because it had Resident Evil, because it had the evil in its moniker, she was a little more
freaked
hesitant. Not freaked out, just hesitant. It took her a couple years. Like, she would let me play it at friends' houses. She just didn't want me to bring it to the house. And after a while, she kind of went, well, if I'm letting him play it at his friend's house, then really what's the difference between him playing it here? So then
the devil always gets in, Cirrus. That's how the devil always gets in. So she turns around 5 years later, you're an atheist, making atheist videos on YouTube. Gee, what harm could happen? What harm could possibly occur? And now, oh, wait, he's an atheist. No, okay, so it sounds like she's a little bit more grounded, and I don't know if liberal's the right word, but she's a little more reasonable in her approach to satanic panic than potentially some of your friends' mothers, I'm guessing?
Not just my friends' mothers, because funny story.
Your friends themselves.
Friends and my friends' mothers. So funny story. I have a friend, or he's not really a friend of mine anymore, but he's a young Earth creationist. And granted, we both were at the time when we were growing up, because that's just what the school taught. But there's a card game that we both enjoyed called Yu-Gi-Oh! I don't know if you've ever seen it or heard of it.
Yeah. I've heard of it.
I still thoroughly enjoy playing classic Yu-Gi-Oh! Not a fan of how the game's evolved, but that's besides the point. That's not what the conversation's about. But there's a particular card. When Yu-Gi-Oh! Came to the States, there was a lot of religious undertones to some of the cards, and they censored that in the United States because there were Christians who went up in a panic about it. Even though
religious undertones from a Eastern religion,
all religions. So one card might have an Ankh on it, but another card would have Christian imagery on it. Like there's
I gotcha. Okay.
There's an entire subset of cards.
Right, but right there, it's one world religion. It's one world religion. It's
yeah,
the beginning of one world religion.
And that's where a lot of, because like there's an entire set of there's a set of angel cards that are based on like the Roman gods, but then there's also a set of angel cards based entirely on Christianity, like with Archangel Michael and everything like that. It's all based on Christian lore, and all of that had to get censored coming into the States because it had more than one religion in it, and you didn't want to upset the Christians.
Right, somebody would trip out on that for sure.
Yeah. And even if you pointed out, your religion's represented in here too, they would have been like, no, but the evil pagan ones are in there.
Right, and they would have even theorized. They would have gone like, it's paving the way for one world religion and accepting there more than one way to Christ. And I can imagine all the freakouts that could have possibly. I don't know what before you continue. I just want to say, I don't know what the actual freak out is over Pokemon in general. I don't know what the complaint is.
The freak out for Pokemon goes like this. So you're familiar with the Book of Job, correct?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
It's like Mr. Bible. You're talking like Mr. Christian.
So Leviathan and Behemoth, if we were to take those in the most literal sense, they would be deemed monsters, correct?
Okay.
Monsters of a kind. And then the fact that Pokemon stands for pocket monsters automatically puts a connotation with Leviathan and dragons, which there's connections between serpents and dragons in the Bible, and there's connections between serpents and Satan in the Bible, ergo dragons and Satan are immediately connected, ergo dragons are in Pokemon, therefore Satan and Pokemon are connected.
Right, but is it really that weak? Is it really that it's talking about monsters, therefore it must be bad? Because Harry Potter, there's some legitimate. I mean, I don't care. It's you got to take it within the context of how people are viewing it. It's a kid's book, But there's some of the satanic panic stuff. For example, I don't know if you know Led Zeppelin. I may be dating myself. Do you know Led Zeppelin? Was that?
Are you talking about the Stairway to Heaven backwards track?
Yeah, but there's a lot more to the satanic panic behind them. But that's one. I know. But so you know Zeppelin. You know the band.
Yes.
Do you know of them, or do you know their music?
I know their music.
Okay, cool.
Not a lot of it, but I do know it.
I wasn't sure. I don't even know what music you listen to. What do you?
Practically everything. If it comes on and I enjoy the sound of it, then I will listen to it. And that's a direct result of me playing a lot of video games where one game sounds
like guitar, those guitar games where you actually, my cousin, my little nephew learned.
Well, nothing about Guitar Hero. Like, I played a little bit of Guitar Hero, but it has more to do with for instance, I love classical music, even though that's well outside of my age range. But I love it because so many of the games that I enjoy playing actually have fully orchestrated classical soundtracks inspired by Beethoven.
Right.
And so that music appeals to me for that reason. Like even freaking Mario Galaxy, that game has an entire full orchestra behind it. And it's all music that is inspired by old classical, Beethoven, Bach. It's built on.
That's kind of like when I was a kid. I would watch Bugs Bunny cartoons, and there's a lot of there's a lot of opera in the Bugs Bunny cartoons that you gets in your brain, and you don't even realize they're famous operas.
And then you start
until
realizing years later, you start liking more and more opera because you got that framework early.
Right.
And
kill the rabbit. Kill the rabbit. Yeah, see? So you watch them too.
Oh, I've watched almost every Bugs Bunny cartoon. Like almost everything that was produced in the early Bugs Bunny lineup, I've seen. Back when he had the round head and they couldn't like settle on a voice for him. Like, no, I've seen almost every Bugs Bunny cartoon.
So when you were growing up, what did you listen to music-wise? Did you listen to Christian rock, or were your parents kind of cool with you listening to whatever then?
So
how did that work?
I wasn't a big music buff when I was growing up. I had soundtracks to some of the video games and shows that I watched. Most of it was Pokemon, but like realistically, as far as music goes, I didn't start really enjoying music as a method of entertainment until maybe my early teens. And that was when LimeWire came around. And during that time, I started downloading, like I would hear one song from an artist and I would download their entire discography and listen to every song they ever produced by themselves or with their band and get a feel for them. And that's where I started developing my taste. So I went through a phase where I was liking a lot of like Linkin Park and a lot of the music that came around that time. And then I started to kind of phase out.
That's where the age thing, because you were right at 15 or 16, right when those bands were coming out, and those are that's like catnip to a 15-year-old.
Yes,
I like them. I think they're pretty cool, but I was listening to them when I was 33 or something. It's a lot different. It's a lot different experience. And you're not like, cool, this is the greatest band in the world. You're like, okay, that's a cool song.
You're just like, oh, it's music and it's interesting. Well, what ended up happening later is over time I stopped downloading discographies for artists and I started downloading OSTs, so original soundtracks to video games. For instance, there's I don't know if you've ever heard of the video game Chrono Trigger. It's an old Super Nintendo game. But it has some of the best classical styled music I have ever had the pleasure of listening to. It actually made me want to go out and get an instrument to learn some of the music and play it myself. I turned out I was absolute horseshit, so I stopped doing that. But
what'd you play? Guitar?
I was actually playing. This also comes with me being a video game nerd. I picked up 2 potato-style ocarinas and learned how to. Because I'd already learned woodwind instruments in my Christian private school because we were forced to learn how to play on a recorder. That was like a prerequisite. You had to learn at least 1 year on a recorder, and then from there you would graduate to either clarinet or whatever else you wanted to do. I was not good at woodwind instruments, so I didn't graduate to doing anything. I just stopped doing it. But when I got an ocarina, I started learning how to read music off of tabs. And it turns out when I'm reading ocarina tabs, I can play it perfectly fine. I just can't read sheet music, which limits my range of songs I can play. But because I liked The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, where one of the tools you have to use in that game is a musical instrument, and you have to play music on that instrument to do things in the game, that was the instrument that I chose to learn on. I was like, this is perfect. I can take an instrument from one of my favorite games to learn music from one of my other favorite games, and it's just a match made at that point. Cool. I still have both of my ocarinas. I can pull them out. I still have them in like their velvet casings and everything because I'm never going to get rid of those.
Wow. What was the band? I was going to tell you. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that's kind of where I would like to say that for the most part, video games shaped most of my taste when it comes to music as a result of that, because I wanted to play because of a game's music, and I wanted to choose an instrument because of an instrument used in a game. It all kind of comes into there.
Okay, I got you. But this stuff, your exposure to video games was outside of you were raised pretty much strict fundamentalist, right? So the video games would have been, that was an influence that was coming in from the world, and I guess your parents would just kind of let it be.
So the story with that is a little upsetting,
because I'm sure it wasn't that easy for your Christian peers who were like 14, 15 to have a whole world of secular influences like video games.
So at PCA, most of the parents let their kids play video games, but they kept a very strict eye on what they were playing. Like most of the kids around me, I just accepted that there was a group of kids I could talk about Pokemon to, and then there was a group of kids that would get me suspended if I talked to them about Pokemon.
The kids themselves would be like, "Oh my gosh, you play Pokemon? Yeah. That's of the devil."
I learned very quickly that was just how that particular world worked. There was a group of people who the latest episode of Dragon Ball Z came on, and we could all talk about that, and that would be nice. And there's another group of people who said, you do realize that they have a different god in that show than Jesus, and that makes it evil. And I'm like, well, I wouldn't have said fuck off at that point because I wouldn't have. It was I know. Like, you just shut up. We're not talking to you. So just go that way. But no, like the teachers would police your speech so much there, though. Like if you were walking on track and you were talking, like this happened when Yu-Gi-Oh was new, so the teachers didn't have any literature or anything to go off of like they did with Pokemon. Me and a friend were talking about Yu-Gi-Oh because we played in tournaments, so we were figuring out what decks we were going to be bringing to the next tournament, and just one of our teachers goes up and goes, "Excuse me, what is Yu-Gi-Oh?" I was just like, "Oh, it's just a card game." Okay. Within a year, there was a school-wide ban on it. Just
wow.
The
kids themselves, though. So this is something I've noticed about Christians in general, which you probably noticed. I'm not wired this way at all, but most Christians are, to at least one degree or another, where they take it upon themselves to be your moral policeman. You're doing something and they feel like they got to interrupt you and say, like, you do realize that's not of God. Mm-hmm. That's like, because of how I wasn't raised Christian even a tiny little bit. So that's like anathema to me. That's like so not how I'm wired. Even as a Christian, it takes me a long time. It would take me a long time to notice, like, oh yeah, that's sinful. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah. I'm not saying that I would do it myself per se, but for me to actually get in somebody else's face about it, that's just not how I'm wired. And that's how a lot of Christians are wired, correct?
They are. Like, even funny, like what's funny is there's actually even a bit of miscommunication. So what happened? So funny story. So PCA, you saw in the deconversion video, they essentially own a compound and like several campuses. Like they've got money, lots of it. And this will tie in. So with PCA, like I mentioned before, you have kind of the thought police that come up to you and say, hey, what is this thing you're talking about? Are you allowed to even think about that?
Those are thought police kids, though, right? Not thought police adults.
There's kids both. And teachers. There's both.
Right.
Because there's, like I said, there's the group of kids that you can talk to about stuff, and then the group of kids that will report it to the teachers.
Right.
So, funny thing is there's you're familiar with Lego, correct?
Yes.
So Lego ran a comic book. Lego ran a comic book called Bionicle for a little while. And Bionicle was literally just an adventure of a bunch of characters from a Lego universe that was offset from the regular Lego universe. And it was just your standard Saturday morning cartoon type of adventure. Just a fun romp. DC Comics actually wrote a lot of the Bionicle comics, so they also had good writing behind them for Legos. So funny story. The PCA had a summer camp. They had two summer camps, Camp of the Pines, and then they had a secondary summer camp that was on the college campus they owned. So Camp of the Pines actually had a shop in it, because in Camp of the Pines, you were there and you were basically autonomous for the time you were there, with the exception of if you were scheduled to go to church or you were scheduled to go to the swimming pool or anything like that, then you would be going to those places. But past that, you were kind of left to your own devices. So there was a shop we could go to there, and I noticed that they had pens that had Bionicle masks on them. They were selling in the Christian shop, and there's nothing unchristian about Bionicle. Again, it's literally just Legos. They were selling those pens. So I was like, oh, cool. So I picked them up, and then I brought them to school. And then my teacher confiscated them and said that they were of the devil, to which I responded, which of course got me in trouble. You realize I bought these at Camp of the Pines, which you guys own. If they're unchristian, why are they being sold at your store? Bear in mind, this is third grade me, so obviously that didn't fly.
It's a good point, but yeah, no, I can't imagine that type of rebellious would go over too well.
No, and it
But-
didn't. I got in a lot of, what's funny is I got in a lot of detention when I was at PCA, but as soon as I got into public schooling, I suddenly stopped getting in trouble. Really weird, right?
Yeah.
But that was one of those things that just struck me. I'm like, do you realize how hypocritical you guys are? And this was me, like, nothing was making me renounce my faith at this point. It was just me looking at the people and going, do you realize how hypocritical this is? You are so ill-informed that you don't understand that this piece of merchandise was bought from your campus, and yet on your campus you confiscate it because it's not allowed on your campus. How does that even work? How much misinformation has to go through your head for that many wires to get crossed?
Yeah, I don't understand it. And there's also the thing that the part that trips me out, and I'm a Christian. You realize that, right?
Yeah,
You know?
I'm very well aware.
Okay. So the part that trips me out, though, is that when you were raised the way, like in normal life, in normal world, to be like the type of person who says, I can't believe you're doing that. That's like the poison person. That's like the person that everybody hates. You know, you can't do that. You know, so it's like totally against my nature to ever even think of, like with the adults doing it, you know, it's more normal coming from authority figures. They got to act like, you see that in public school too. I used to notice that all the time.
When you've got the children policing it too.
That's when that's where it's like from another planet. Like the authority figures in my public school were douchebags, just like you explained. They were just douchebags for different reasons.
Yeah.
You know, and they'd be just as hypocritical, and they'd be, you know, there were 4 or 5 who were just off the charts awful. And for mostly some of the same reasons, they wouldn't be that different. They just wanted to be authoritative about something. So they find something to trip out about and get in your face about. And, you know, that's pretty standard issue for a certain type of low-level authority figure. I think it's human nature. You know, the power goes to their head, and because they have very little of it.
Power trip.
Right. They just want a power trip. They don't. I don't think there's any real rationale behind it per se. But with the kids,
they don't even realize they're power tripping. It's just a knee-jerk reaction for a lot of them.
Right.
But the kids, that is a completely different story.
That's from a different planet, because that's like you've got to have wired up that kid to be like that.
Yeah,
that's not natural.
And that's what PCA did very well. So when I was bringing up the friend of mine who was a young Earth creationist at the time, I brought it up because there was when some of the cards were coming into the United States and being translated, there was one card in Japan that was called Hell Poemer, just a poet from hell. And obviously here that wouldn't fly. So when they renamed it in America in an attempt to make it, you know, more not so problematic with Christians, is they made it one word, Hel Poemer. So it's more like Nordic hell, not Christian hell.
First wasn't very good rewording. And
the problem was, what I did, I always called it heel palmer, because that prevented that whenever somebody would read it, it didn't say Hell, and if I said heel palmer, the immediate reaction would be, oh, that's fine. I learned very quickly that there were certain ways that you could say things that made people not jump down your throat. Unfortunately, it was a card that was used by one of the main villains in the TV show, and my friend at the time was allowed to watch the TV show and play the card game with me all he wanted, until an episode came where the villain played that card and said very loudly and very plainly, Hell Poemer. And as soon as he said that, his parents confiscated all of his cards, banned the game from being able to be played at his house. And the funny part was, you'd expect when something like that happens, like you said, the child would become kind of rebellious and go, well, there's something wrong about that. Nope. He went completely complicit with it and was like, no, you're right. It's of the devil. I can't have it. Just snap of the finger. Just like that. Bear in mind, this is the same person who later in life, when I became an atheist and we started talking about issues of creationism, I pointed out that there's no evidence for the global, global extinction level event type of flood that young Earth creationists advocate. And I know that, people like William Lane Craig and SJ, they don't advocate for the same type of flood. they advocate for one that's a little more, you know, squared with what modern geology would actually show, which
Right.
I would call the Younger Dryas event. But the global extinction event level flood can't have happened. And I pointed that out to my friend, and I said, can you cite me one article as a primary source that can show me, you know, perfectly well that that Noah's flood happened in the way it's described literally, the way that you're trying to espouse? And he said, sure. And this is when I realized how far off the beaten path I had gone from him, because the article he linked me was from AIG with Ken Ham on the front.
Oh, wow.
And as soon as that happened, I realized that's the world I came. That was when it finally clicked to me that that was the world that I came from.
But these are people you grew up with, right? So this was like
people I grew up with.
You palled around with in, like, you know, when you were like 13, 14. Like if you were on Facebook, he'd be one of your Facebook friends.
He is one of my Facebook friends.
Okay, so you're on Facebook and it's I rest my case. I nailed it completely.
This is a person who I have known since I was, 8 years old. This person has been part of my life for almost all of it. And then I can see from that is how far the paths have diverged from where I was when I was in school. Because it didn't even really strike me so much that I used to be a young Earth creationist, because I remembered that I had a lot of teachings that were revolved around that, and I had the whole, we have a Scottish professor here who mapped out the Bible to 64.
What does he think of you? Is he really tripped out by you now, or does he know the full extent of your? He's
seen my channel, and he thinks that I am deliberately attempting to spark discourse. Basically, he thinks that I'm just always trying to start a fight. Is his opinion of me, which is really weird, because if anybody's actually
you're not very good at starting fights.
If anybody's watched my channel, I don't think I really come across as somebody who tries to do that.
Maybe he means debate. Maybe he means like deliberately be controversial to, I guess. I don't know. It's a very strange thing. I can't. One of the reasons why I like talking about this particular angle on it, how being raised, because I was raised so differently, and one of the things I've said, and you probably agree with this, or at least I'm batting around this concept, is that if I were raised the way you were raised, and I were put in your shoes, and I had walked through your life the way you did, I would probably come to some of the same conclusions on some level. Correct? I mean,
I say maybe, only with the exception, though, that I know several people who walked through almost the same beats I did and still came out Christian. Maybe slightly secular Christian, but still Christian, like very Christian. Like I know that the particular individual I was talking about, for him, he went all of his years in PCA and then went to the college and everything. Like he was, indoctrinated full on in the cement, and then cement poured over. But I know others that went to PCA and then later on went to public school like I did, and around the same time. And we ended up on completely different paths, even though we were walking a very, very parallel path. So I'm not saying you're wrong.
No, I'm trying to get inside, because it's so foreign. Two things are foreign to me. Well, the foreign was how you were raised is very, very foreign to me. Even though I'm a Christian, I can't imagine being raised the way you were raised at all. I mean, my father went to church, and my mom was ostensibly Roman Catholic still. But like I said, it was probably mostly because there wasn't any popular atheism for her to latch onto when she was like 23 or 24, when it would have really, really resonated with her. So she just kept, living her life and never really walked away from the church, except every once in a while she would protest, for pro-choice reasons.
Yeah.
But nobody ever expected me to adopt the tenets of Christianity. I was never expected to read the Bible. We went to church on like Christmas or Easter, and nobody was ever like, my father went to church and he believed in God, but never once did he say to me, did you ever look at the teachings of Jesus and start really thinking about it? It would have been really weirded out if I had. Yeah, when I became a Christian, it threw everybody back in New York, because it was like, so like, what? It was so out of the park in terms of left field, like that was the last thing on earth they were expecting to happen when I moved out to California.
So I know for me, my mom is a Christian, but she's so one of the best things about the way I was raised. There are a few things I hate, none of which are my school. I'm actually very happy that I went to the school that I did, mainly because it means that I can come out with the experience of that. I don't like that the experience happened, but I'm happy that I have that in my arsenal as something. It's something that I have. In fact, I actually want to do a video at some point where I go back to my old school and do a bit of an expose on like how it operated from within. Just get the
that'd be really interesting.
Like get permission. Hey, can I walk the campus with a camera real quick? I was a student here for 7 years. I still have my yearbooks and everything to prove it. Would you guys allow me to walk around the campus and shoot some B-roll footage? They don't have to know exactly where it's going to. And I don't seriously doubt they're going to care. I would love to do that on both the main campus and college campus. That's probably a project I'm going to try to complete within this year. I would
definitely do that. That sounds like that's a cool video in the making. That's a really interesting video.
But so even though I went through that, there were a few things that were not uttered in my household. A few good things and bad things. One of the bad things, and one of the reasons video games essentially raised me, is my stepfather did not allow any speaking outside of your room. Like you couldn't, if he was on the computer reading something, he didn't want to be disturbed in any way, shape, or form. Computer so happened to be in the living room, therefore anywhere outside of an inside room was within earshot. So I was essentially locked in my room at all times behind a closed door. Like that was my life. And he was also a very abusive person, so my mom didn't get much say in any of that. That was the first 15, 16 years of my life. It was only later on when they divorced and she married somebody who actually has a brain, that I started experiencing what freedom felt like. But for the most part, I couldn't really have friends come over to my house. I couldn't really walk out of my own room for any extended period of time. I couldn't hold conversation, and I couldn't speak at PCA because I wasn't allowed. So I was raised mainly on video games, hence my music taste, everything else stemming from that. I'm not terribly upset about that. I'm very happy about that. There's a lot of experiences that I hold near and dear as a result. But there was one thing that my mom made a point to never do. And it was she never, ever, ever at any point in time uttered the words, "because I said so." It was something that I never heard once in my life growing up as a child. If she told me I couldn't do something, she had a bona fide reason. She had a bona fide reason, and she would be willing to explain the reason behind. And it's probably one of the reasons why I have a problem with totalitarianism and authoritarianism now, because I grew up seeing that you can explain your reasoning behind everything. You can. You never have to resort to "because I said so." Especially if you're the adult with more life experiences, you can come up with a reason. Even if it's out of your butt, you can pull a reason out and at least give the child a peace of mind that there's a method to your madness. And so I'm very thankful that I never, ever, ever grew up with the words "because I said so." So when I went to my friends' houses and I heard those things, it didn't register. I went, "Your mom is saying because she said so? What? But why is she saying that? It doesn't make any sense."
And they're like, "Shut up, shut up, shut up. It doesn't have to make sense. Shut up."
Yeah, pretty much. And so whenever, and it was like when the cards were taken away from my friend because of the thing that happened with Yu-Gi-Oh, I understood why they did it, because hell is apparently just enough for them to freak out about. Fine, it's their deal. But any single time something is uttered and it is "because I said so," I just immediately go, "No, you have a reason. And if you don't have a reason, then I don't have a reason to listen to you." It's probably one of the reasons that it's one of the reasons that I've probably been promoted at the jobs that I've been at, and one of the reasons why I've never been promoted terribly far at those jobs. There are some managers that actually like the fact that I have that approach to things. I will never say to somebody "because I said so," but I also don't accept "because I said so." And some managers luckily take that as, "Oh, he wants to learn more things about the company. This is somebody we can promote." Thank God that is the way that some of them have taken that.
Because that could easily be read a completely different way.
Oh, and it has. It definitely has. It has gotten me in trouble at other jobs.
I'm sure. I'm sure. Usually that's considered like, it's not. It's usually like, you know, do what I say is like, for the person in authority, that's exactly what they want. They don't really want to be questioned. You know, 99 times out of 100, you see the reason why when you start questioning is because they don't really know what they're doing or talking about. So
No, and
when you start questioning,
and that's something that I personally can't stand. I think if you're going to be in a position of authority, you need to know enough about your position to give me a reason. If you can't give me a reason, why do you have your position?
right? Yeah, but then right away, you're by definition challenging the authority just by even what you just said. If I were the authority figure, I would, on some level, it depends. It depends on how talented and cooperative you were, but on some level, I'd already recognize, okay, this guy's a troublemaker.
I think
this guy's.
what it comes down to is with that particular view that I have to be very pragmatic with it. I can't just be contrarian because I feel like being an asshole that day. But if I see something that I legitimately can't square, like I can't figure out why something's happening that way, then I will ask why. And if they can't give me a reason, then I'll go, okay, then why aren't we doing it this more efficient way? So I will utilize it insofar as it's pragmatic to me, but I won't just be an asshole with it.
Right. But it's a tendency that has the it definitely can be counterproductive to getting ahead, because oftentimes getting ahead requires that you just kind of go along and play along and, you know, don't ask too many questions.
Yeah,
But,
and I'm not a big fan of that.
No, obviously not.
Yeah, which is one of the reasons why I'm trying to push my YouTube channel in a direction that will allow me to run it as a full-time thing. That way, at the end of the day,
I could easily see you getting there relatively soon. I mean, you know, you've definitely got the beginnings of that. You know, it's not going to be all that hard, I don't think, for you to get it to that point, depending on how much you want to make. But I could see you doing that easily.
I want to make enough to survive and survive reasonably comfortably. And reasonably comfortably means if I can make enough to where at the end of the day I have $0, but we have food in the fridge and bills are paid, that's all I care about. I don't need more.
Right. But the other thing to keep in mind in this whole thing is that you are way young, and you're learning unimaginable amounts of practical hands-on things about the industries that are going to be dominating even more so 10, 15 years from now. So, you know, there's a lot of different ways that you could reap benefits financially from. But I could easily see you having a YouTube channel that you could live off of within 2 or 3 years, easily.
Yeah, and that's
matter of fact,
kind of the plan.
That's where you're headed. Yeah, well, that's where you're headed. I mean, I don't know what the actual number is on subscribers, but there's a lot of different ways to monetize. You know, even like selling T-shirts, I see people are doing. And
I actually just designed my first T-shirt. That's going to be going. So you know how the ending tagline for all of my videos is insert end of video tagline here. The shirt actually says insert front of shirt tagline here.
Cool. And then how does it? It's that T.com, right? Are you doing them?
It's going to be through Teespring. I'm going to run that as my first shirt.
And then they sell it for you, right?
Yeah, they sell it for you. All you have to do is you do the legwork on advertising, and they do the legwork on printing, and they don't charge you anything until after the campaign is over. And when you get charged, it's only like, say you sell a bunch of shirts for $20 and they had to spend $10 or $8 making them, they will take $10.
They take it out of the shirt.
They'll take $10 per shirt.
They take it out of your sales.
Yeah, they'll take it out of the sale. So what they have is this is the minimum you're allowed to sell a shirt for, and this is the amount of money that you will make if you sell the shirt for this much. So like for them, like minimum amount you can sell a shirt for is $10. Most people sell them for $20, so that they will get $10, and then the YouTuber will also get $10. And that's the tack that I'm going to be taking with that. The first shirt's going to be that, and then the next shirts are probably going to be a little more artistic. I'm going to get a Pam and maybe a few other people to work on them. The only problem I have at Teespring is they have what's called campaigns, where you can sell shirts for a limited amount of time. And as much as I like the idea of that, I also would prefer to have like a shop set up where people can select anything they want. and I could have multiple things available at once.
They have those too. You know, I'm
They
sure.
do,
I'm sure
but
some
you
of your
have
friends
to.
already got that up and running.
So there's
Right?
two side effects to that. So there's one called Razzle you can use, but Razzle has bad ratings almost all across the board. Like if they
Okay.
sell a shirt to one of your consumers and they don't meet certain quality expectations, they will only do a half refund for the shirt to the consumer, and they won't accept the shirt back. And even then, you have to fight them tooth and nail to get them to do it. Like they're known for hanging up on customers that are giving complaints. So even though they have literally everything I want, insofar as that you can sell mugs, T-shirts, etc., and print whatever you want on them, and they'll sell them for you. They will not allow they will not allow customers to get what they need from them if they are the ones messing up. And there's where I have problems, because I am also a graphics designer, because I designed all the graphics for my channel outside of the base avatar, which I bought, and then the 50 plus versions of it that exist are all because I've modified it myself, because everything else on my channel.
Who'd you buy the base avatar from?
There's a friend of mine. I don't know if he wants me to name drop him, so I'm not going to. But there's a friend of mine who I played Hearthstone with 6-ish years ago. And
okay, so it's just someone you know.
Yeah, I mentioned that I wanted to make a YouTube channel, and that channel I'd closed off because I had no use for it anymore. But I mentioned that I wanted to make a YouTube channel, and I wanted an avatar so I could do a little bit with animation. And he said, "Sure, tell me what you need, and I'll tell you how much I charge for it." I said, "Awesome." So I spent a little over, I think the first round of avatars he gave me cost a little over $50. So a little bit pricey, but at the same time, I've gotten enough use out of them now to where they've pretty much paid for themselves. And I only needed the 4 base avatars because I can do photo editing. So once I have the base models, all I have to do is modify them from there. Like, that's easy. And he made it an explicit point. He said, "Hey," because at the time I was running a Hearthstone YouTube channel, and he said, "Hey, even if you don't end up keeping with your Hearthstone YouTube channel, which I only ever got like 40 subscribers on," he said, "Hey, even if you don't stick with this,"
that's all I have. That's great. What do you mean? I only have like 37, I think,
so far. But he
so
said,
far, yeah, I'm growing huge.
He said, even if you don't stick with this, I would like to see you continue on YouTube, because I think it's something you should do. So, 6 years later, funny story is I didn't have access to the avatars or anything. They were actually all on a laptop of mine that were broken. And I never had a computer that could run anything, higher than freaking running Windows and a Word prompt after that point. But we met a guy here in Georgia who builds computers for people on a budget. And so we turned in our other computers that we had that were broken that he could use for parts, and we used that to pay for me and Pam both getting gaming computers, full desktops. And when I said, "Hey, there's some data in this laptop that we're giving you that I need, do you think you can pull it out of there?" So he pulled all the data out of it, and my avatars, the 4 base ones that I had, were in that data. I pulled them out and said, "Okay, I can start a channel with these now. Now that I've got my 4 base avatars back from years ago, I took them and I've turned them since into roughly 50 different ones that you've seen whenever my avatar is animating and moving its eyes around and stuff. Those are all different images."
Right.
Yeah, all that's like separate images layered one on top of another to make that happen. That are all just built from that base one that I finally had access to again. So I pretty much took his advice when he was like, "Yeah, just use this for whatever you need to." I'm like, "Okay, sure." 6 years down the road when I have access to it, absolutely.
Right. See, but it's totally, I could totally see you. There's a lot of different things that you also could probably almost start to do. You could probably start to sell services too. Correct?
There are some that I could do. Anybody who needs photo editing done, I can do. Anybody who needs basic animations. The animated intro that the Geek Room was using for the Atheist Roast Battle this last time, I animated that frame by frame. So like basic animations I can do. Editing, like if anybody wants to say, "Hey, I had this video idea, can you build it for me?" Of course I can do that. That's what I do on my channel all the time. I can do video editing pretty easy.
What do you do your video editing on? You do it on just a free app, or you have?
Yeah, it's on a completely free app. It's called Hit Film Express. It is 100%
because I got to get
free.
better at the technical. Just hearing you talk, I mean, I'm as you can see when you look at my channel, I'm very, very, very weak on the technical aspects of building up this stuff. But you know, I could probably be better. What's it called?
It's called Hit Film Express. It's free with one caveat. The caveat is you can only have it on one machine. And when you get it on that machine, you have to shout out Hit Film on like Facebook or Google Plus once, and then it activates your account when you do it. Once you do that, then you have access to it. And I figured that with the amount of robust options they allow, like a single shout out that took me 2 seconds to write, yeah, that's perfectly fine payment. When if I got the same thing through Adobe, that'd be $35 it'd be $50 a month.
Yeah. Totally.
Or if I got it through if I got a Final Cut, that would have been, $300-$400 worth of a program versus a 2-second tweet. Like, I'll gladly use one as a payment over the other.
Okay, so let me ask you one last question, and then we'll start to, because my wife will be home soon, actually.
Okay.
But this was actually perfect. So you have an open invitation. Anytime you want to do this again, come by and we'll hang out and we'll talk shop for an hour or so.
Okay, and that's perfectly fine with me. Like I said, we have our disagreements, but I don't think we're ever really going to come to arms about it.
Yeah, and at some point we may even start talking about some of our disagreements. We didn't even get to it tonight.
Well,
one of the things I want to do is, did you remember the time where you and Stephanie and Steve had that I guess it was on Steve's channel where you guys were talking about morality? You were talking about 4 or 5 different things, but the one that I thought was really interesting.
We were talking about her 11 questions video. And she had 2 questions that were pertinent to morality, and that's where we got into that. Right.
I would like to have both you and Steve on talking about morality, because I thought that was really good.
I've already talked to Steve about it, and he says he's up for it.
Cool. So maybe that'll be the next thing we do. We'll try and find this time where we can do it.
And I will be perfectly honest though. So me and Steve are kind of on the same page with morality, in that we're both moral anti-realists, but there's a certain point where we both think that the conversation can only go so far and it stops being useful after a certain point. But I find the conversation more interesting than Steve does, though. But I did get him to agree to come on.
Yeah, well, the reason why I think the conversation will be really interesting, and if it doesn't turn out to be interesting, we can change subjects. It's not really that complicated, you know. But like, I just have a feeling it could get really, really good because.
You seem to drone off there for a second.
Oh, did I really? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yeah, now it's fine.
Okay. So last question on the satanic panic things. The ones that you grew up with, it doesn't seem like it was that big of a deal in your household in terms of nobody was really.
Not in my house.
Your mom was relatively mellow about it. She wasn't all freaked out about the devil's going to get you if you listen to this music or that music.
My grandparents bought into the satanic panic hard. My mom, however, did not. Like, for instance, our funny story. There are some things that the pastor said at the memorial service that kind of torqued my nerves. Not just just random Christian things, because if my grandfather was a Christian, he has a Christian service, that's fine. There are just certain things when you start talking about hell in the middle of a memorial service, I start getting upset, because at that point you're sending.
He was talking about trying to evangelize, or talking about it.
He used it all. I kind of expected it was going to happen, but
I was actually gonna ask you about that, because I realized you went to a service like last week?
This is yesterday, actually. This was yesterday. The memorial service was. He almost used it as a platform for proselytizing for just a smidge, and then he got off the topic. And I was very happy he did, because I'm, as you've probably been able to tell, I'm very comfortable in front of a microphone. I have no problem getting up in front of an audience and going, "Look, this is a memorial for my grandfather. Please do not spit on his grave. Now continue." I have no problem getting up in front of an audience and saying that, because, quite frankly, I get death threats for some of the things I say on my channel. What's a congregation going to do to me? Honestly.
You get death threats for the things you say on your channel? Really?
Yes. I have gotten...
From people other... Wow. Really?
It's almost all been Muslim. Especially, like, there was a video I did on an imam who said,
"Oh, that's right, you do Muslim stuff." Yeah, that's kind of crazy.
I don't treat any religion as special. If I see an idea that I think is bad, then I'll try to do it. I try to say what I can about it.
That's fine, Suris, but Christians aren't going to behead you, so just be careful. That's all.
They aren't. But my thing is, you know what? For one, I don't think most of them are going to actually do anything about it, and two, if they honestly try, I grew up in a ghetto.
You'll kick their ass.
I grew up in a ghetto, and I'm never not armed. Like, that's not me trying to, like, beat my chest. It's just me trying to go, look, I'm not going to let somebody threaten me to the point where I'm not going to speak my mind.
Wait, what? You pack heat? Are you serious?
Not guns. I'm not a huge fan of guns, but I am a fan of knives. And I do know how to throw a knife and keep it straight and have it stick. Which is enough, because in most situations somebody's going to be close enough to you to where that's still practical. This is just from the experience I had, because I grew up in a ghetto. Like, I was the one white kid in the black neighborhood. And
where was this? In
Montclair in Pensacola, Florida. That's pretty much where everybody got their drugs from. So I learned very quickly that almost all altercations, for the most part, take place up close and personal. If you're going to get mugged, they're not going to mug you from 20 feet away. They're going to mug you from up front in your face. Even if they have a gun, they're going to do it from up front in your face, which means that in those situations, a knife is as practical as a gun.
Well, if you know how to use it, sure.
Well,
I'm taking,
that's the thing. I do know how to use, to an extent. I'm not an expert in any way, shape, or form. But if it comes down to, can I defend myself using a knife? Yes.
Okay, so the Muslims going to better watch their back.
if one of them actually tries to do anything against me, I know that
this in Islam, and they got something to say. They better watch out.
I know the one who issued the first death threat is in Holland, so I'm not really terribly upset. I'm not really terribly threatened by him.
Okay.
Yeah, I got the information for where he is and where he goes to college. Like, you're not.
Now, did you hear of the Led Zeppelin? You mentioned the playing Stairway to Heaven backwards. Mm. Was that a thing that was around that you heard about? Actually,
when YouTube started to get big, a lot of the music playing backwards actually came back into fashion. So Led Zeppelin was a big one to play backwards, because you would hear, like, in a tool shed where he made us suffer, sad Satan. Like, that was one of the big things that you would hear. Right. There was also Britney Spears' Toxic. If that was played backwards, somehow you heard, "Oh, please sleep with me, I'm not too young."
Really? I didn't know that one.
If you played Revolution 9 backwards, you heard "Turn Me On, Dead Man."
Turn Me On, I've heard that.
Yes.
I know that one.
I'm trying to remember some of the other ones. A lot, like, once YouTube got big, a lot of that stuff kind of came back because there was a platform for it now. Kind of like how Ken Hovind fell off and then YouTube kind of made him pick back up. Just YouTube brought a lot of things back just into the modern era. Where
I didn't know that. So what happened with... I don't even really know that much about who Ken Hovind actually is. But what happened with him? He disappeared. He was big in, like, the 70s and the 80s, and he kind of disappeared.
He was big in the early 90s. His entire shtick was he would either have debates, or he would go to different churches and he would speak to their congregations, and he would speak anti-evolution. He would do a Gish Gallop method, where he would throw out so many technical terms that somebody listening in an audience couldn't actually pick apart what he was saying. Now, granted, with the advent of the internet, we can, because we can pause videos and Google what he's saying and then realize that, okay, that one's full of shit, that one's full of shit. That's something you can do now. But, you know, back then when all you had was a VHS tape and no access to the internet, you really couldn't. You just kind of had to take what he said on face value.
Right.
So he would use this Gish Gallop mechanism to make it sound like he knew exactly what he was talking about. And he would blow the things he said out of proportion. So he would say, for instance, he said, I have taught in a high school for this amount of time. Well, no, he didn't. He taught high school students in the back of a church, but he did not teach in a high school. He'd say, I have a doctorate in this. No, he doesn't. He has a mail order in doctorate that's less than even an honorary. So he doesn't have any of the credentials that he says he does, and the ones he does have, he blows out of proportion to the point where they don't mean what they say. But because back before people had the ability to fact check these things, he got really big, and his whole ministry was built on selling VHS tapes of these sermons, and he would just sell them all around, and that's how he got his money. Well, what happened with him though is he got caught in what's called structuring, where when you're withdrawing money, there's a certain amount that you'll get taxed on. And when you're withdrawing money, you can withdraw it in increments under $10,000. Otherwise, there's a huge tax that gets taken out. And when that huge tax is, because, you know, if you're withdrawing so much money to build a business of any kind, that's why it's called structuring, after a certain point, the government wants to have their cut. That's how they always are. I have no problem with that. But what happened with Kent is he was withdrawing in certain amount. He was withdrawing in right under $10,000 repeatedly, but he started abusing it and getting sloppy, and he wasn't reporting his taxes anyway, and he didn't report them for 9 years. What's funny is he even said that in sermons. He would say, I haven't reported my taxes for 15 years. Then, of course, he went to prison for 9 years for structuring. When he came back out of prison, his son, Eric Hoven, which, funny story, my grandparents live 10 minutes away from Eric Hoven's warehouse. But I wanted desperately to go there at some point to speak with him, but the first time I was there, he was out on an event, and the second time I was there was only on the weekend, and Creation Today isn't open on the weekends, so I was upset. But Eric took over all the assets for his father's ministry. Well, when his father came back, his father asked, you know, can I have those back? And Eric said, no, I've pretty much taken your empire and I'm building it in a different direction. So what Kent did, Kent originally subscribed to evidentialism, and Eric ended up picking up presuppositionalism and moving in a completely different direction than his dad did. But he used a lot of the same arguments. He basically took his dad's material and then built it around his rhetoric instead. So what happened with Kent is Kent lost his platform completely. Like, he came back out of prison and no longer had a platform. So he built a new platform on YouTube, and he got a lot of his old audience that had his VHS tapes to start looking him up through YouTube. And now he's got a YouTube channel that's growing at a decently big rate, but he got a plot of land in Alabama that was donated to him because he can't leave Alabama. He's not allowed to leave it. He's on probation in Alabama even after getting out of prison. Like, he's not allowed to leave the state.
Was he on the non sequitur with Aaron Ra?
Yes, he was. He was on the non sequitur with Aaron Ra.
Okay.
But
I get him confused with a different guy.
Gotcha. Okay. No, he got a plot of land given to him as a donation, and he's turning that land into what's called Dinosaur Adventureland now. But it's essentially just a giant compound, and he lives in a trailer on that land. I have no problem with living in a trailer. If I'm going to get a bunch of land for free, I'll live in whatever the hell happens to be there. I don't care. Like, that's all I need is a square of room for a studio, a square for a bathroom, and a square for a kitchen. And then I'm fine. I can figure out sleeping arrangements later. But so from what I understand, he's living in a trailer on compound that is now being turned into Dinosaur Adventureland, and he's rebuilding his ministry that way since his old ministry was taken over by Eric. And that's in a nutshell version of the Kent Hoven story, from what I understand.
Did you watch Psy? Speaking of presuppositionalists, did you watch him on Shannon's channel?
I didn't watch our conversation with Shannon, but I saw a little bit of his conversation with Steve on Argument from Contingency.
I don't know him. He was also on Pine Creek. Do you know Pine Creek?
I know of Pine Creek, but I haven't seen him on Pine Creek. Honestly, I'm not a huge fan of Psy, so
I didn't think you'd be a fan of him at all. A huge fan. I think for the most part, he drives atheists completely bonkers.
Well, he drives us bonkers because he doesn't just use Presup. Presup in and of itself isn't horrible, but he uses a very Psi 10 version of Presup that's just
it starts to drive you mad after a while. It even starts to drive you mad when you're listening. Even as a Christian, it starts to drive. When he was talking to Shannon, there was only so much that I could listen to before I was like, God, this is starting to just drive me crazy, because you know where he's going with it. Or he's like, okay, so now,
well, he's got a.
Why do you believe that?
He has a script.
And what's your grounding for believing that? And what's your grounding for believing? And you're like, you're not really. I don't know. I don't necessarily want to put him down, but it's not necessarily convincing.
Well, what's funny about his method is he does the whole "why do you believe that? Why do you believe that?" But his epistemology is based on a presup, which means if you say "why do you believe that," he can just point to God as his presupposition, and that is the grounding for everything he says. Even though it's a very weak grounding. I'm way more convinced when somebody says, "I've had these experiences and I've had this," and they use evidentialism to get to God. I'm not convinced in any way, shape, or form when somebody presupposes God. I think that's the weakest argument you can have.
Well, it's not that it's weak insofar as I've never heard his full intellectual justification for it. So I'm not necessarily saying it's philosophically weak, but in terms of as a practical matter, when you're on a show with an atheist as something that's convincing to them in the moment, it's absolutely terrible. It is absolutely useless.
Oh, I will say this. There's a difference between... So he had a debate with Matt Dillahunty.
Yes, I watched that.
So in the debate with Matt Dillahunty,
Matt killed him in that, I thought.
Matt destroyed him in that. But in the debate with Matt Dillahunty, I agree with you 100%. When he's having to justify his position to someone like Matt in front of an audience, Matt's going to rip him apart like he did. Whereas with the conversation with Shannon, that was more of a conversation among peers. And so even as frustrating as it was, I know that Shannon got a lot of flack because they were like, "Oh, Cy walked all over you in that debate." Shannon's like, "It wasn't a debate. That was a conversation."
Right.
It's like if somebody looked at our conversation here and said, "Oh, you didn't address anything about Craig's Christianity." Like, that wasn't the freaking conversation. We're not talking about
this is a lot more obviously a conversation than that was. That he didn't really treat it. She obviously treated it as a conversation. I even made a video on it where I said, I sincerely doubt. And I brought up the fact that somebody in the comments said, Cy won that debate. And I said, I sincerely doubt that Shannon considered that a debate or something that needed to be won on her end. She was just trying to give him the space to do his thing and to talk and explore. She wasn't trying to beat him.
It's the same thing that happened when I went on SJ's channel with you. Neither you nor
you got killed in that. No, that was different. You got killed. You got totally dismantled. That was totally different.
But neither you nor SJ made an attempt to, rip my position apart. It was mainly just asking questions about why and kind of trying to figure out, okay, where do you stand? That's an honest thing to do. And that's what Shannon did. I have no problems with conversations like that. No, you don't have to have a winner or a loser there.
You don't have problems with conversations like that.
No, I don't. If somebody wants to ask me, hey, what is your epistemological reasoning behind this? Okay, sure. I'll give that. Like, I see no problem with that. At that point, it's just curiosity, and there's nothing wrong with curiosity.
Well, it's also there's two things. First of all, if you're secure in your position, you don't feel threatened by somebody not agreeing with you or having a totally different point of view.
No,
so it's more like, and that's how I view, and I said this in the video I made about Godless Cranium and Shannon, because they got flack for it the last weekend too, when they had some other Christian on their show. And, people were getting frustrated because he would say these things and they wouldn't challenge him. And I was like, I don't really think that that's what they were trying to do. They weren't trying to challenge. They were trying to understand. They were trying to say, okay, this guy is wired up differently than I am, and he perceives the world completely opposite I do. Let's try and figure out what makes them tick. That's at least what I think.
And I think
their goal is.
And I think that's more constructive, because then, so you can dismantle the person's position with anything. I've learned, based on the amount of time that I've been studying philosophy, which isn't a lot, but it's been enough. You hang around Steve McRae long enough, it happens by fiat.
Right. You just listen to him talk, and you're like doing a decent job of studying like epistemology right there.
That it doesn't matter what your position is, you can use philosophy to dismantle it. You can dismantle a theistic position, you can dismantle an atheistic position, you can dismantle an agnostic position if you are willing to go that far. That's a lot harder to do, but it's doable. You can dismantle any position using philosophy as long as you understand the lingo a little better than the other person.
Right.
Which is why I don't think that it's necessarily beneficial to do that sometimes. Sometimes it's beneficial to challenge somebody's reason for believing something or not believing something, solely because you can maybe get them to find a better reason to believe what they're believing.
Okay, well, the difference is you can where I think you're going with this, I think you'd agree with this, is if you're in a real conversation with somebody, you're trying to get at the truth.
Yes.
One way or the other. So if I'm challenging your position, and there may come a time where you and I are having where I'm challenging your position, it wouldn't be to dismantle suris and break him down, because all that is outmaneuvering somebody intellectually. That's irrelevant.
It's the same thing that happens in a court of law between two lawyers.
Right. Who is outmaneuvers who is not necessarily important at all. It's, what's the truth? And let's use our brains to get at the truth of the situation. But you and Godless Cranium and Shannon and Drew and a bunch of other people are not necessarily unique, because there's a bunch of you, but you're different in that way. Correct?
I've been told about as much.
You're not looking to break somebody down.
No,
you're looking to get at the truth. Period.
The only time that I care about breaking somebody down is if they've made an attempt to break me down first. And then, of course, at this point, the stipulations for the conversation have been set. Or two, I think that they are espousing a particularly dangerous idea, and my aim is to challenge it.
Right.
If my aim is to challenge a particularly dangerous idea, at that point, I'll start coming in with, okay, here's a hypothetical. Okay, here's a thought experiment. Okay, here. Okay, why are you no longer consistent here? At that point, yes, I will, because once I find something dangerous, I'm going to do what I can about it. I'm a humanist.
But you're challenging something that's noxious to you. You're challenging an ideology that you find hateful. That's a different thing. If you just had somebody SJ says, Jesus loves you, Cyrus. He goes,
I'm probably just going to go, okay. But for instance, whenever somebody tries to tell me that they espouse something homophobic and they're a Christian and that's the reason behind it, the first thing I do is I don't tell them, well, screw your Bible. The first thing I do, and you've seen me do this on Twitter, the first thing I do is I go, well, let's see if your scripture actually says what you think it says. And I'll go in and I'll go into their religion, learn what I can, and go, okay, from what I understand, this is what your Bible's actually saying here, not what you're saying. And I'll see what I can do about changing their mind on the actual dangerous thought.
Right.
And I think that goes a lot further because, one, you're taking the time out of your day to understand their side. That's automatically going to be more useful than saying, well, screw your holy book. And two, it's a whole lot easier and, in my opinion, a whole lot more useful to get somebody to ditch a bad idea, a single one, than ditch an entire religion. And I don't even necessarily think that people should ditch their religions. I just think that if there's bad ideas that are stemming from them, please cut the caustic ideas out.
Okay, this leads me to a question, because I don't actually know the answer to this. Do you consider yourself an anti-theist?
I consider, so this is a weird question, only because depending on what I'm being directed at, I would consider myself an anti-theist, and if I'm being directed in other areas, I would just consider myself a secularist. So, for instance, if somebody had, let's say Islam, for instance, I personally find Islam to be a harmful ideology. incredibly harmful. And yes, I understand there's a conversation to be had about how it's had 700 years less time than Christianity, and it might have its reforms. And there are imams like Imam Tawhidi who are doing everything in their power to reform it. And I'm 100% behind him, what he's trying to do. That's fine. But there are certain things within their ideology that literally cannot be squared with any type of egalitarianism. Like if you read through Surah 2 and Surah 4, it explains everything about how you're supposed to treat women and how you're supposed to treat inheritance. And it's a very negative view, incredibly negative. And to me, all women are people, and I'm people, therefore they're no different than me. And there's an idea in the Quran where if there's a contradictory idea later in the Quran, it usurps the original idea. It overpowers it, and the original idea is dropped. But there's nothing that usurps Surah 2 and Surah 4 later on in the Quran. So there are particular ideas that cannot be translated in different ways that are just dangerous, built into the ideology. So in regards to Islam, yes, I would just consider myself an anti-theist. In regards to Christianity, at best point, if we're isolating particular ideas, like young earth creationism, I will consider myself an anti-theist 100% towards that in every way, shape, and form. If somebody, Catholicism, I'm not 100% anti-theistic towards it, but there are certain ideas that are ingrained in it that I think are incredibly dangerous, like a lot of the ideas that come from their positions on contraceptive, for instance. I think that those are very dangerous ideas to espouse, because if you tell somebody an abstinence-only education is the way to go and also don't use contraceptives, there's a few paths that lead down, and none of them are the way they're trying to get at.
So you're more, if I can, let me see if I can summarize it. You're more opposed to specific ideas that you think are harmful or potentially noxious or play out in ways that are dangerous. And if those ideas are associated with religion, you're actually more about the ideas.
Yes.
If there were positive ideas associated with the religion, you're totally fine with that. You don't necessarily think that those are a problem. It's no. Only within the context. And then wow, okay, that's a good way to summarize it, right? It's the idea itself that you're
probably the best way to summarize it. Because for me, I think that taking I agree with some of the things that Shannon and Godless Cranium have said, where they will say that
I don't actually know what they've said. I got to get them on the show. Good, Godless Cranium's coming out Wednesday.
So one of the things that they've both said, and I agree with it, is that you do not need religion to do certain things. You do not need religion to build community. I agree with that. You do not.
Godless Cranium said that.
Yes, that's he thinks that there are secular methods that can replace religious methods for almost everything, and I can actually agree with that. I have not found a single thing that there are things religion does better, like building community. It does better than everything else. It does it really freaking well. But I do not think that it is the only way to do it. And if it's not the only way to do it, then why not find other ways as well? I don't think that religion is necessary, but I also don't find it dangerous in and of itself as long as its power is kept in check. I think you and I can both agree that theocracy is bad. There's no reason to have theocracy. So both you and I could probably agree that religion...
Unless I personally was in charge of it, then it'd be fine. But other than that, if it were me running it and it were my theocracy, that'd be cool. But other than that, no.
The theocracy of Craiganism.
Yes. Now we're talking. Now we're getting somewhere.
But if, like, for instance, for me, I grew up where community came from two things, either church, or I grew up where I could also go to a card shop and play card games with people. And so I dealt with a community of 30 to 50 people every single Saturday. So to me, you could get people in a community based on their similar interests, and it might not be as effective, but it's still effective. So you don't need religion for that. But if somebody wants to have religion in order to do so, I'm not going to stop them. My problem is with the caustic ideas. And one of the caustic ideas to me is theocracy, which you and I at least both agree on. Theocracy in and of itself is a bad idea. Religion should not run government. Religion should be separate from government and have no power or authority when it comes to government. Let people keep their faith. Let them pray in their...
Okay, so here's the potential problem, and this exists in a lot of Christians, and it shouldn't. What I find a lot of people do, they're supposed to be reading the parts of the Bible that says, you know, humble yourself, and your job is to love God and serve God, but humble yourself towards other people and make other people more important to yourself. Literally says that. Mm-hmm. Most people who the problem is, they do something really strange. They read the Bible and go, aha, I got to make sure my neighbor does this, instead of read it and go, wow, I really got to try and do this more.
This is the issue you had with Matt Powell as well, because you pointed out that you both read the same Bible and seemed to come out with completely different conclusions.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
And I can actually agree with that, because I have that same issue where if somebody reads their holy book and then says that I should be living my life according to their holy book, I'm sorry, but no. But
that's not how the holy book tells me to behave towards you. That's the point. It tells me, you know, Paul says, I become like everybody so that I can save some. So in other words, if you come on my channel, I'm supposed to like chill out with you and break bread with you. And like, you know, you start talking about something harmless or fun or cool, and I can relate to it. I'm supposed to meet you where you're at and try and be humble and Christian towards you.
Well, this is the difference between something like your more reformed versions of Christianity that we have in the secular world today, and your more radicalized versions of Islam that have the concept of jihad thoroughly ingrained.
Right. That's a very interesting concept and I've heard that thrown around on Twitter by a bunch of people, that, you know, Islam hasn't gone through a reform, and that could be why it's still got some of the toxic elements are still very much prominent. Years younger.
It's a much younger religion than Christianity. Not to mention it has it has another big problem with it in that it says that it is the final revealed prophecy. Nothing else can be revealed from it. And that is so terribly dangerous because, for instance, and I'm not saying that this is a good thing for Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses, because I think they're both dangerous organizations personally. But at least with Christianity, you can have a pastor say, well, it has been revealed to me that actually we should love our neighbor even if they're homosexual. Like, that's a thing you can do in Christianity, correct?
Right. Yes.
In Islam, you can't. In Islam, you don't have anything revealed to you. The Quran, the Sunnah, and the Hadith, that's it. What Hadith you accept, that's pretty much, that's as flexible as you can get. You can't have any more revealed prophecy because the Quran is the final revealed prophecy. Therein lies one of its most dangerous components, in that it is much less flexible.
Right. So you're saying I, as a Christian, if I'm a pastor, I can tell my church, if I'm saying it with a clear conscience, look, I prayed about this, and God says to me, you know, you got to be cool to homosexuals. And, you know, I'd have some congregants who are like, what? I'm out of here. Are you crazy? And the other congregants would be like, cool, finally. But I could, with a clear conscience as a Christian, say, look, I prayed about this, and this is what I honestly think God is saying. So this is what we're going to do. And, you know, in Islam, you just don't do that at all.
No, there are some that try. This is one of the reasons that Imam Tweedy, I would actually really suggest looking him up, honestly. He's a decent guy from what I can tell. But this is one of the reasons why there's so much backlash to people like Imam Tweedy. So, for instance, like in the secular Christian world, a lot of the issue comes down to when we see people like Steven Anderson or Matt Powell. Most Christians go, no, that person, we don't stand with him. Like, you see that a lot. Right. In Islam, what I see, though, is it's a lot of telling people like Tweedy, who literally is an imam of peace. He goes, I have a very different definition of jihad. It involves no violence ever. It never gets to that point. And even him, he considers part of his holy war against his own Muslim compatriots if they espouse bad ideas. I can kind of get behind that. but he is considered an ostracized portion of Islamic society, whereas here people like Steven Anderson are. I think that shows a very big difference in how those ideologies are structured.
Yeah, I would agree. I gotta actually wrap this up though, because
that's perfectly fine.
We should do this again very soon. If not with Steve, we can do the same thing with you and I for an hour sometime, like even next Sunday, even if you want.
Next Sunday, I might be able to. It really depends on if there's any other plans going on. Right now, there's a lot of stuff going on with family, obviously. Death in the family does that. So my schedule is going to be very sporadic for the next few days, or next few weeks, probably. But if there is a time where I'm available, then I will gladly pop back on and talk about pretty much whatever. I have no issue with that.
Yeah, cool. So we'll do it again very soon, either with you and Steve or just you by yourself. And I thought this was actually perfect. You were my first atheist guest. My first guest who wasn't SJ.
Well, SJ is not an atheist guest.
No, my first non SJ person on the channel. So let's you can tell people where you're at and where to find you, and we'll wrap it up.
All right.
I don't know if anybody's even watching, but we'll see.
Oh, I know that we have Shane, Dinobot Full, and Clade Starfish who are watching.
Oh, cool. Shane, I know. I've seen Shane on Shane was watching something this morning, I think on Heathen Podcast or something like that.
Gotcha.
I think maybe.
So for anybody who's still watching or people who watch this after the fact, my name is Suris. You can find me on youtube.com/SurisSkeptic or Twitter @SurisSkeptic. Either way works. My channel, if you haven't heard enough about it already on here, is just about tackling particularly bad and caustic ideas, whether they happen to be anything religious or if it's something like anti-vaxxing or drinking urine. I pretty much try to run the gamut on that. Past that, thanks for letting me hop on here, Craig, and I enjoyed having a conversation with you.
Yeah, man, it was fantastic. So anytime, the door, mi casa e su casa. The door is always open, Cirrus. Anytime you want to drop by and say, by the way, I want to talk about XYZ, Muslims are bothering me and I want to complain. Or Christians are bothering me, or the Christians are doing good things and I want to say a praise report. Anytime. So let me know and I'll have you on. Okay.
Alrighty. Awesome.
Cool. All right, man. Peace out.
See ya. Hopefully the wife doesn't give you too much aggro.
No, I doubt it. We'll see.
See ya.
Okay. How do I do this? Am I still on?